What's up, everybody? Today we got bans, we've got buffs, we've got nerfs, we've got kind of adjustments. We got it all. Let's take a look. What up, what up, what up? Welcome back to my channel. I'm Roxora, and here we talk about all things Magic the Gathering. And today, yesterday, probably by the time that you guys are watching this, there was the January announcement for ban and restricted cards, and we got changes in standard, legacy, and historic, as well as alchemy rebalances, which we'll talk about as well. I'm going to just briefly cover the legacy ban. I don't think a lot of people are particularly, invested in legacy. Or at least here. Ragavan was a card that, I think you were seeing a lot of play in Modern and Legacy. People were thinking it might get banned in both. It turned out it was just Legacy. Some people are happy about it, some people are not. I like the monkey. I think the monkey's fun. I own a couple copies of the monkey. Hopefully it doesn't get banned in Modern, but, it is what it is. As for the modern, ban, there is no modern bans on here. A lot of people were upset with that, hoping for a Lurrus ban, hoping for, some kind of change, maybe Urza Saga, maybe, Mishra's Bubble, something to, help the format be a little bit more diverse. We didn't get that. I kind of think they should have gone with the Lurrus ban here. Or at least something to reduce the prevalence of Lurrus or Bobble or Dragon Rage Channeler decks. They kind of just are running everywhere. We saw even like Jund, Mardu, like all the these red mid range or aggro decks are running Ragavan. So, anyways, let's talk about the big meat. We've got Alrund's Epiphany being banned in standard. This was an obvious one. It was such a problem for a while. A lot of people weren't having fun. And so it gets the ban. And this is actually really great to see, not just because, it fixes the format, but also, it shows, a good message to the player base that, just because they have alchemy, on Arena, they're not just going to ditch standard and, let standard be a terrible format. They're actively looking at it and will make bans. Probably, honestly, probably too late. Unfortunate, but better than nothing. So hopefully the format is better from this point on. Similarly, Divide by Zero was, another hit to these blue decks. And that was a surprise to me where, I kind of didn't really think Divide by Zero was that powerful of a card. It was definitely good and was definitely an auto include in a lot of these decks. But I didn't really see, here they talk about how, it kind of insanely stifled aggro and made the control decks or these Leer and Hullbreaker horror decks incredibly good. I don't really think Divide by Zero was the card that was doing that personally. I definitely thought it was more of Hullbreaker horror and Leer doing a lot of the heavy lifting. Divide by Zero really could have been any interaction spell. It could have just been, I forget the name of the unsummon. I'm having trouble remembering, but like, a lot of these cards, perform that effect, in some ways better, than Divide by Zero. So I just don't see Divide by Zero. Yes. And I know, the learn, portion is also very nice, getting to grab, the environmental sciences or, the draw two or any of that. So all well and good, but I guess, they decided they just want some more diversity and Divide by Zero definitely probably was, inhibiting that, just being a force of 4 in the deck, as well as taking up multiple sideboard card slots. So anyways, sad to see it go. But it was fun. It was fun. I liked the card. And then we got Faceless Haven, which, a lot of people are saying, okay, they nerf, control, they got to nerf aggro as well. I think also they talk about how Faceless Haven was essentially a freebie. There wasn't a cost to putting into the deck. Where is it? Yeah. especially against many of the popular decks. Represents a lot of power by virtue of being effectively efficient on its own, right? It's just, uh, 3 mana. You play it, you can cast your spells, while you're waiting to get up to 4 mana, and then all of a sudden it's just another card you have. So the opportunity cost, as they say for this, was fairly low, where you just ran this and you ran Snowlands, and you had a 3 mana 4/3 with Vigilance. Yeah, so it was already nerfed in Alchemy. Um, Honestly, I don't even think the Alchemy nerf was probably effective, but wasn't that substantial. So um, yeah, I think this was a good move. Um, Especially with, do we have? I guess we do have Field of Ruin. Do we have Field of Ruin? Yes, we do. But even with it, it's like already it's like so easy for these decks to just use and threaten. So, anyways, let's move on to the historic changes. So we got memory lapse banned, so you will be getting your wild cards for that. Thank goodness. I don't. It's been how long since this card's been suspended? So that's good. And then we've got Teferi Time Raveler being unbanned, but only because it's being rebalanced. So, the same type of ways that Wizards is able to balance Alchemy, they're also going to do now with Historic. And, we'll take a look at that when we get to the Alchemy changes. But first, let's talk about, the changes overall, or some of these ban announcements again. I thought the standard bans were all fantastic. A little upset about the divide by zero. I kind of disagree with the choice, but I at least respect that they are, again, making changes and taking decisive action. I like to see that. Again, don't really care about the legacy ban. That's whatever. And yeah, this was a long time coming. We'll talk about the Teferi Time Raveler. Excuse me, Teferi Time Raveler as we get to the Alchemy adjustments. All right, so now let's talk about the Alchemy rebalances. So we've got a lot. We've got a whole bunch of them. I'm kind of going to group some together because a lot of them are, similar cards. But first up, we've got Acerak being changed, so that it no longer, you no longer get to sacrifice a creature. You just get the zombies. Your opponent previously could sack a creature and you wouldn't get the zombies. Yeah. I don't think this card sees a lot of play, and I don't think it will, just with this change. It's there. It exists. Cool. We've got Assemble the Parts going from 3 and a black to 1 black. So 4 mana total for this kind of mini reanimation effect. I think this is pretty cool. I think the changing it to double black isn't that much of a color restriction. So maybe we can see some kind of reanimation thing. I don't know. We've got Blood Rage Alpha, which I don't even know what it does. Doesn't really see play. Getting additional point of toughness, probably fine. Maybe some wolf decks do things. And then we have a bunch of changes to the venture mechanic. Or just a bunch of kind of middle of the pack cards. So the Gargoyle getting reduced in cost, as well as getting reduced in toughness. We've got Dungeon Descent, which has a huge change. From it does no longer enters tapped, and you can just pay 1 mana and tap an untapped legendary creature to venture. This seems still really bad. We've got the Planeswalker, which is just getting a minor buff. Its Planeswalker ability, its ultimate ability is now easier to activate. And yeah, cool. I think we've got Fate's Reversal here as well, getting reduced in cost. Find the Path, adding colored mana now. Precipitous Drop, getting cheaper. Adventurer getting a buff and power, and that's about it. I think that was all of the adventure cards. As for these, none of these really saw play anyways, but maybe the adventure decks will get some new toys. Maybe the Gargoyle is better, plus this does its ability faster, maybe. But I don't see cards like Fate's Reversal, Find the Path, maybe Precipitous Drop. seeing a whole lot more play. Triumphant Adventure was already kind of doing its thing, and the the one power doesn't matter as much since it has Death Touch. Maybe it increases the clock, but I don't know. I'm not sold on these changes. They're fine, but they're not really the kind of defining changes that I would maybe like to see. But who knows? Maybe maybe there will be a little bit of a buff. Puppet Razor getting an additional toughness. What does this card even do? At the beginning of your end step, exile one creature from your graveyard. If you do, seek a creature with mana value equal to the mana of that one +1. And it gains menace. Okay, okay, kind of interesting. So maybe that does something. And then we're seeing a couple readjustments here. Adjustments. Divide by zero, which as we saw was banned in standard, is seeing a pretty much a nerf, where it only now learns if you target a spell or a permanent with mana value 4 or less. So it's still going to do its thing on 1, 2, 3, in the early turns, and then later on it's just a 3 mana return a spell or permanent. So this nerf probably doesn't do a whole lot. I think there are going to be some scenarios where, if this targets a Leer and you don't get the learn, you might miss out a little bit. But on average, I think it's still going to be a decent card. So that's kind of nice. And I think this is showcasing, kind of what we were talking about earlier, where it wasn't really the effect on the card. It was the fact that it was a Divide by Zero was a spell that gave you a good spell that gave you another potentially good spell. So that kind of makes sense to me. So yeah, I'm happy that I can still play with Divide by Zero in Alchemy, at least in some semblance. This is the one ban that I was really, not ban, nerf that I was really happy to see. This adjustment changing Fearsome Whelp to be at the beginning of the upkeep instead of at the beginning of the end step, and they kind of tacked on haste, which I'm gonna completely ignore because it's not relevant at all. But definitely love the change. Them playing this on turn 2 and just immediately getting the discount was backbreaking. This triggering on upkeep gives your opponent a chance both on your end step and on their turn to respond in the early turns before this takes effect, and really takes control of the game in your favor. So I think dragons might still be good. I'm not 100%. So again, if you think about it in the scenario of you play this on turn 2, it lives, and you untap and you get the effect. It has the same, momentum effect that it did before. Again, it's just giving your opponent more counterplay. So I still think that dragons can be good, but we'll have to see. A lot of people are really happy about Hullbreaker Horror being changed to basically be counterable now, no longer having the text of the spell can't be countered. I'm really sad because I love this card. I bought 4 copies of this card. I'm hoping to play it in some kind of constructed format somewhere. You've seen a whole bunch of lists that I've played on the channel here. But I do kind of understand that part of the card was kind of just crazy to me, where it's like, wait, okay, it's a 7 mana 7/8, it's got flash, and it has all this, control elements, and it can't be countered. And they mention here, that some decks like these have, Malevolent Hermit, and Leer, which is already uncounterable, kind of effects. It's kind of too much, and so they want to add things like Disdainful Stroke to make it so that Hullbreaker Horror is counterable again. The thing about that is, if Leer is still seeing play, Leer makes it so that counter spells could still. Leer decks don't typically play counterspells, they typically play Divide by Zero. So this can always be Divide by Zero, then removing this text doesn't change that, but we'll have to see, because I believe there is also a Leer adjustment. We've got Inquisitor Captain being changed to if you cast it from your hand. Right, so basically you have to have cast it from your hand, it enters, and then you get the thing, you get the effect. So that was meant to basically interact well with Glasspool Mimic and Soul Herder. They've effectively removed that, so no longer can you Glasspool Mimic your captain and then get another trigger. And a lot of people didn't really like that. It was just way too much, just captain, and getting lots of value off of that. So still a good card, again, still a good value where you get a 3/3 and you get another creature off of it. So still a potentially good card to put in your decks, just not going to be abused with these cards. All right, so here we go. We have the as I said, the Lear Disciple of the Drowned adjustment. I think just a nerf, where you can only play the flashback cards during your turn. So no longer are you going to be able to play your instants at instant speed on your opponent's turn. So we've had some bounce effects, we've had Divide by Zero, we've had a lot of these removal spells being able to be used, right? So we have these, as they mentioned, Fading Hope. That was the card that I was thinking of earlier, where you could, on turn 6, play Lear and have Fading Hope up for if they remove or try to remove your Lear. You just Fading Hope your own Lear in response, bounce it to your hand, and now you can preserve that powerful game engine. So no longer going to be no longer going to be able to do that during your opponent's turn. You can still do that during your turn. But yeah, I think this is an unfortunate, like, I kind of liked how Lear played, but this interaction with Fading Hope definitely felt kind of, abusing, where I didn't really get punished for, running out Lear if I had Fading Hope in my graveyard. Now it's definitely going to be more of, all right, you are probably, the Lear decks are probably going to change, so that, Lear, you have to play it and just use something like a removal spell, to buy back a removal spell, hope that, your Lear lives, and then continue to cast removal spells. We've already seen decks move away from like counter spells and things like that, to, because of Lear's spells can't be countered text. I think we're going to pretty much, move away from instants in general and just try and use good spells. They could be instants, but again, they have to be cards that you're willing to play on your main phase, because that is where I see this happening, where I think you're just going to transition to all of the murders, all of the discard effects, like duress and things like that. And that's going to be how you take advantage of Lear. We also have a Sanguine Brushstroke nerf. This was another deck, or another card that a lot of decks were abusing, or putting in their decks to create success, giving you a Blood Artist and giving you kind of a Blood Artist. Basically making it so that you drain both when a creature dies or when you sacrifice a blood token. They're not changing how Blood Artist works, obviously, because that's an already existing card. They're changing how Sanguine Brushstroke works as a card, and they're making it so that you no longer gain life. So you only drain your opponent for 1 when you sack a blood token, but you still gain the life and such from Blood Artist. Again, no changes to Blood Artist as a card, because it's a paper card. Townraiser Tyrant also being nerfed here. Not a huge nerf, just making it so that it has to target a non-basic, so no longer going to just shoot down all of your opponent's lands if they have some basics. And I think that's a good change. I think that's what the card was designed to do. Them nerfing both this and Fearsome Whelp does kind of suck. I don't think these cards particularly, change all that much, but we'll see how good the deck is, and maybe now Townraiser Tyrant is no longer just an auto include in a lot of red decks. A lot of these red or like mid-range decks were running this card even if you weren't dragons focused, and just having it as a 4/4 flying that had this effect. So I don't know. We'll see where Townraiser Tyrant ends up, but I think this is a good change. I definitely think it should be, a card more oriented towards, messing with non-basics, as opposed to just any land. That seemed a little too much. And then the big announcement, the big thing is now they are adjusting Teferi and putting it back into Historic. A lot of people were panicking about this, going, "Oh my gosh, Teferi, the card was busted." So but let's take a look. So first of all, they increased the cost of the card, so it's now a 4 mana planeswalker as opposed to a 3 mana planeswalker. Good changes already. They added a starting loyalty, so it now starts at 5 instead of 4. And they've changed the static text to your opponent can't cast spells during your turn. So this is a huge change to how the card works. So previously, Teferi said your opponent can only play cards at the time that they could play sorceries, which would interact poorly for the opponent whenever they had something like Finale of Promise or Dreadhorde Arcanist or any other card that had this kind of triggered ability that casts a spell. Or, was a spell that casts another spell. So Finale of Promise is a spell that, as it resolves, is trying to cast another spell. And Teferi, since it says you can only cast cards as sorceries, you can't cast sorceries while there is a stack that exists. So, you weren't eligible to cast those spells. So a really, harmful taxing tool to a lot of these decks that wanted to use these cards with these effects. And now we're saying, no, it's only that you can't cast spells during, the player's turn. This is also a great change because it also allows your opponent to participate in a counter war. So previously in Control Mirrors, if you played a Teferi, you pass the turn, and your opponent tries to play a spell, and you counter it, your opponent was ineligible again because they could only play cards as sorceries. They were ineligible to counter back. This does not do that. This says you can't cast spells during your turn, but on your turn, on your opponent's turn, if you cast a spell to counter their spell, it is still their turn. They're able to cast a spell to counter back. So kind of removing a lot of the toxic traits of Teferi Time Raveler. And making it a lot slower of a card. Again, they do give it that loyalty. I'm really curious to see if that loyalty comes into effect. Because you could play it on turn 4, bounce something. If it lives, you could tick it up, cast something at instant speed, and then next turn bounce something, and you get a decent amount of value from it. Is that enough? I don't know. But definitely a good way to reintroduce a card as a potential tool, as they say, for anti-control. So this could be a control mirror breaker, where you board this in games 2 and 3. You play it, and it does what you want to do. You're allowed to, cast spells during your turn without the fear of counter magic. You can also play spells as if they had flash, all these very useful. The question is this card going to be a good enough inclusion, against aggro? One of the things about Teferi was that it hosed the control decks, and the bounce ability and such made it effective against aggro decks, where you could bounce something and it gave you a good tempo play. You could tick it up and use something like a Wrath of God or something during your opponent's turn and clear the board at instant speed. All very powerful plays for you to do. My thought is, at first glance, no, I think this card is now reserved to a sideboard card, and, don't really see, it doing much else. I definitely think you have, probably, 2 in your 2, maybe 3, probably just 2 in your sideboard. Maybe if you are a control deck and you have space, you could put 1 in your main deck, again, as a hedge against control decks. And maybe if you draw it against aggro, you either just don't play it, or you play it and you use it as a bounce effect, or to cantrip, and you're okay with that. It's not backbreaking. That's what my hope is. I hope that Wizards has learned their lesson, and I think they know what they're doing here. I think this is a good change. These are all good ways, again, as I said, of reducing the toxic aspects of Teferi. Dreadhorde Arcanist and these kinds of cards are cards that people really enjoy using, and Teferi getting in the way of that, is not something we want here. All right, so those are all of the alchemy changes, and also, again, the banned and restricted announcements. Again, very happy with the standard changes. I'm always a little bit disappointed by these adjustments. I never really feel, again, besides the nerfs, I never really feel like they're going to accomplish much. Like, these all are great. All of these nerfs, even the Hullbreaker Horror one, even though I'm a little sad, all these are great. These buffs, I really don't feel like they're going to make an impact. I don't really see any of these cards starting to see play. Maybe assemble from parts. But other than that, none of these cards were even seen to begin with, and it's impossible to know, if they've gotten any better. So Always really disappointed with that. I get giving players, some ability to, play the cards and have them feel better, but I just don't see any venture deck or this card or even the puppet raiser really doing much in standard from how I see it, or sorry, in alchemy. Excuse me. But what do you guys think? Let me know. Yeah, that's gonna do it for the video though. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, remember to leave a like, comment, subscribe, all of that stuff. And you can also find me live at twitch.tv/roxora098. All right, guys, I will see you guys for the next video.